Charles, we're switching to English.
Okay.
I'm happy to greet my friend, my internet friend. I know him only online, but it looks like we know each other for quite some time and we find a lot of common topics to discuss. This is Charles Cole. He's an expert in Russian language. His Russian is impeccable, and many viewers who saw his meeting with me online before admired his brand of Russian language, very educated, very stylish, and unfortunately almost in a lost art where Russian language is concerned. And it's definitely a rare thing in this country too, his expertise in Russian language. And I'm saying it not just to praise, because he doesn't need my praise. He's very accomplished expert in Russian language, a linguist and an educator. But he's also an author, and he wrote a book which was very interesting to me in terms of me living through this time of covering my formative years, early 70s in Russia. And Charles, tell us a few words about the book, please.
Well, I was able, here in retirement, I was able to put together I came across some old materials that had to do with a trip that I made in 1972, right after I graduated from college. I should say that by that time, I had already been studying and learning and using Russian for about 6 years. So the opportunity came for me in 1972 to join the staff of an American government, United States Information Agency foreign exchange exhibit, which traveled to the Soviet Union. We spent 6 months there. So I traveled around for 6 months in the Soviet Union with that exhibit, and saw many, many things and learned quite a few things about the people, the citizenry, the Soviet Union itself, the system, just everything. And so when we stumbled across these older materials, my wife said, "Listen, this stuff might be interesting. Why don't you see if anybody else has written it up?" And I did some research, and to my surprise, through a library and an internet search, I couldn't find anybody who had written up their experiences, because there were a few of us each year. The United States Information Agency sent an exhibit behind the Iron Curtain, mostly to the Soviet Union. And for 20 years, we had an exhibit that went there every year. And on each exhibit staff, they had Russian-speaking guides, people who would greet the Soviet visitors to the exhibit in each city, and would explain to them the various things we had on display, and then talk, usually fairly freely, about just life in America and etc. So it was really a unique experience. I calculated it just the other day for giggles, and turns out that if you multiply, we had 23 guides on my 6-month stint. Right before us, they had another shift of guides that had about 20 people. So let's figure 40 a year times 20, that's 800. Well, that's 800 people out of how many millions have lived in the United States over the years. And I thought, well, and I remember thinking before I left the Soviet Union, wow, I wish more people of my generation could have been here, could have experienced what I did, could have seen what I did. And it was from a unique perspective, because it was all in Russian. I mean, so what I tried to do then is writing this book. What motivated me most, I guess, was on the evening that Barack Obama was reelected in 2012, after what I would have to call less than a stellar first term as president. There were the nightly news showed a group of young people outside the White House, and they were chanting Karl Marx, socialism, socialism. I thought, what? And then 4 years later, I see the phenomenon still there. Here comes Bernie Sanders, this self-identified socialist. He's never registered as a Democrat. He's been a socialist all his life, and these a rather large number of young people that were supporting his campaign, and so my wife and I talked about it, and she said, you should really write this up because these people have no idea what they're calling for. And so I did write it up, and my real purpose in writing it at that stage after those things was uh, I wanted I wanted to invite the reader to come with me on this journey. Let's walk back through it. And the reader, he or she, can sit right next to me, travel with me, learn the things that I learned, rather uniquely because they wouldn't have been able to do it in the Soviet Union. They didn't speak Russian, but I did. So the book is in English, and I tried to make it in conversational English. I didn't want to. I've read enough academic treatises in my life to say. And besides, my wife said, "I'll kill you if you write anything like that." So, but I tried to make it user friendly, reader friendly, and I wanted the reader again to experience what I did, what I had. And I thought, well, if we show them, and again, there's not theory in this book. I don't write about all the ideology or this. I just try to show Americans, look, this is don't listen to what these people say. Take a look at how people in that system were forced to live, and they couldn't get out. They
It's
were
interesting.
trapped.
The book is called In Russian Wonderland. And of course, it's available on Amazon, and I hope a lot of people will read it in English and familiarize themselves with what it says. But it's also a very simple book. It's a book that you can read and understand. Just as Charles said, it's a book that is written to make itself available. And I was on the other end of this whole situation there. I was 12 at the time when Charles was there, and I was trying to sneak into those exhibitions of the American life. I was very, very keen to see what it is because uh, about 70% of my family, my grandfather's generation, so I had a big family, of course, who was alive at the time and living in the Soviet Union. But before that, their parents, they got out, they got to the United States, and they built a whole life for themselves here. So it was very important for me to know that I knew that I would end up. I'm in Brooklyn right now, so I was pretty much sure that I will end up somehow here in the States from being pretty young, of pretty young age. But I kind of certify, and a lot of people who read Charles' book, they certified that it was exactly the way he wrote about it, and he had this amazing, I would say. He didn't look down his nose, in the situation where people lived in. He tried to find out what was going on with their lives, and I must tell you that 1972 and the entire 70s that was later called during Perestroika years by Gorbachev and his journalists. They were called it the stagnation period. Everybody was so happily ensconced, so happily rotting in this situation that the communism built by that time. No one had an inkling of an idea that anything could change. The socialism and communism would end. This whole repressive machine would be destroyed. And moreover, that there is nothing better than communism. You only think about it. We were thinking as young kids, we tried to kind of dispute things in our own way. Not, of course, encouraged in school, but still, we talked about things we loved, the Beatles, etc., etc. So we kind of thought, what could be better than communism? Everybody's equal. Everybody's loving each other. It's like flower children, all over again. You cannot really find any faults in communism. And then you understand the facade, and you understand the inner working, and you see that you were sold a watch without the mechanism altogether inside. You only have the faceplate for this thing, right? It's amazing, and Charles brought us back to me and other people who read this book and lived in Russia at the same time. He brought us back, but it's and it's very timely. It's what you see today around us, where people are talking about great socialism, great virtues of communism, and how it could be implemented here. And we have people who are sure that nothing will change. The communism will be here, but capitalism, with all its, fruits of capitalism, all its spoils of exploitation, it will remain nevertheless at the same time. It's not possible, Charles. Don't you think?
Right, and this again, it's you brought out some outstanding points because I do want to say before we forget it about the title because it's a little misunderstood. One former Soviet citizen contacted me and he said, "Well, maybe it was a wonderland for you, but it was hell for me." And I had to contact him back. I said, "No, wait. Let me explain to you why I used the term."
Charles, avoid
After
sarcasm. Avoid sarcasm.
after I returned from that trip, within a fairly short time, I was hired back at the original military school where I'd started learning Russian 6 years prior to that to teach Russian. And in that capacity, I was able to also interact with former Soviet citizens for basically 30 years until I retired. And it was from them that I got the idea, basically, or I thought back on it. They would refer time and time again to, in a cynical way, they would refer to the Soviet Union as Strana Chudes, literally meaning land of miracles, and that's the title, by the way, of Lewis Carroll's work. This is a Russian title, Alice in Wonderland. So I really should have put the word Wonderland in quotation marks to indicate right away that it was that. But back to some of the points that you made. Yeah, I think today, and this is people such as yourself who went through it, lived it, knew it, experienced all the full weight of it. I've noticed over the years they try to tell Americans, what are you doing? I remember when they first started talking about Obamacare, and the goal was this single payer, one size fits all government healthcare system. And on the radio, I was at that time back in Ohio, in the Cleveland area, and a lot of these former, not just Russians, but people from Czechoslovakia and Hungary and Poland would call the radio station and say, "What are you people doing? You have the most effective healthcare in the world, and it seems like you want to voluntarily go over to this other thing, which is an absolute disaster. You may have healthcare insurance, but try to get the care. That's the problem." So over the years, I found that the key element here, I think, that's been, I guess, the fox in the hen house, has been our educational system. As you recall, I did use an example in the book. We were passing through Moscow on one of our several journeys through there as the exhibit traveled around, or waiting for it to get to the next station. A friend of mine and I went over to the old Ukraina hotel in Moscow, and it had a very large, very nice dining facility. And all of a sudden, he and I were speaking English together, and there was a group of 4 African students there. Mm-hmm. And the leader of their group noticed we were speaking English, so he walked up and he introduced himself, and he spoke very good Russian, and he said, "Shall we sit down and have dinner?" I said, "Sure." So during the course of that dinner, I was just curious. I don't remember exactly which. It was a small African nation, whether it was Mozambique, I'm not sure, but it was a small African nation, and I asked him quizzically. I said, "So, how many of your foreign exchange students do you send here to Moscow?" He says, "Oh, we send them all here." I said, "Really? That's interesting." He said, "Well, yeah, that we used to send about half and half. We'd send half here, the other half we would send to the United States, and they would go to Princeton, Berkeley, and Yale, or what. But they came back Marxists, and the ones that we send here for 3 years, sometimes four, come back from this dedicated anti-communists, and they remain that for their whole lives." And I thought, well, there it is. There's the perfect example of how this has, I think, gone off the tracks. And remember, that what I'm describing was 48 years ago. Now, it's had 48 years to be watered and further, tilled the soil and that. And now we've reached the point where the campuses of our country have become just these far left echo chambers. Conservative students are treated, they're harassed, they are silenced, they're muted. All manner of things happen to them, and I thought, well, here we go. That leads to the next item, and the next point that I wanted to talk about, and that's this horse collar censorship that we see in this country, not only in the universities, but I mean in society, in the media. When this Black Lives Matter business came up, of course, people don't remember that Black Lives Matter had been around as an organization for a while. It's been around 7 or 8 years. It really started to gain steam with the
Trayvon Martin
incident, and yes, in Ferguson. And
Ferguson, then
the
it was
two,
Michael Brown. Okay.
yeah,
Yeah.
the hands up, don't shoot, that one, yeah.
Yeah.
Um, the interesting thing that is, we now know because these people have come forward and volunteered the information. Two of the three major founders of Black Lives Matter as an organization have admitted publicly that they were trained Marxists. And they were trained in what? Well, the things that Marxists do to upend a society, etc. And thus, when you combine them with Antifa, now you've got Seattle and Portland and Minneapolis and all the rest of it. So we're reaching a time where this discussion isn't academic anymore. We're seeing this play out, and we're seeing one of our two major political parties endorsing and proposing things that are just, I mean, by American standards, traditional American standards, are ludicrous. And yet, there is a possibility. I hope it's a slim one. But now that Biden has added chameleon camera to his effort, I don't know if that's going to have the desired effect or not. But I worry about it because, again, like you, I've seen it, and like all those Soviets that I worked with, dozens and dozens of them over the 30 years I was teaching Russian, they all confirmed the same thing. And I remember one of them asking me one time, this is several years after I returned from that trip to the Soviet Union, she said, she was from Leningrad, and she said, when you look back on it, what is the first thing that comes back to mind to you when you just think about it, not detailed or anything, but general? And I said, what is still with me today, and I would update it, and it's still with me this day as we speak, is a sadness. It was, I guess, more than anything else, it was sad to see people who, what was their original sin? What was their high crime and misdemeanor? They were born in that place at that time, and they could not get out. And that to me is just pathetically sad. And it becomes even more so when you look at people say to me, wow, that was a long time ago. And I said, really? Okay, look at every system that came beyond or behind the Soviet Union. Every one of them featured those same things. Look at Venezuela today. These people did this to themselves at the ballot box. So this is not some academic discussion we're having here. There are elements in this country who want to do that.
There's a thing that people don't think much about, and just yesterday I sat myself down to watch a very popular a Russian presenter, very charming guy. I love him. I hope to get him on my program in Russian to interview him. Maybe he'll have some questions about Brooklyn. His name is Yuri Dud. He's my namesake, and he made a pretty remarkable documentary about Siberia, and it's about Gulag today, and what people know about Gulag. And the whole point of making this documentary was to show the young people they don't believe, they hear Stalin, they hear communism, they hear socialism, they hear that in the United States is not bad words anymore. So they run after it. They pick up red flags. They pick up all those accoutrement, all these elements of communist insignia, and they run with it. And people need this foundation in the absence of real Christianity, real widespread religion, Judaism, Judeo-Christian basis. They looking for it. They looking. This is the spirituality that pushes them, the nature of human nature. But this fella, this presenter, he made this documentary, and then they met a charming driver they had on a short trip someplace in Magadan, which is the farthest, this closest place in Russia probably to the United States via the Strait of Bering Strait to Alaska on the other end. And he's a young fella, 32, 34, 3 kids, and long distance driver, trucker, trying hard to make a living there. It's somewhat easier because you get paid more, but you pay like $100 per pound of strawberries. You know, that's it. So they said, let's give him a gift, and they took himself to Portugal. Just flew him out to Portugal, and they showed him. He never was outside Russia. He never left Russia. And they showed him Portugal and Spain, partially, and he was absolutely stunned. And those countries they're lovely. I love them both. I've been there in those exact cities that he took him to, and they found Russians who immigrated there. They have Russians who have very successful life there. One is the owner of a restaurant, knows Spanish cuisine in and out. Everything. He's in San Sebastian, which is a very competitive food-wise place. So they went into Portugal. And those countries, economically, they're not the most powerful countries in the world. And yet people there live very comfortable, very interesting lives. They have enough money. They, of course, like everybody else, they have problems related to the fact that they're humans. If they were rocks or they were, I don't know, pieces of furniture, maybe they would have different kind of problems. But people have very specific problems. So that's what they have. But there in Russia, and he showed the cities, how those Portuguese cities look, and how cities, abandoned cities, vast Siberia, vast construction during the communist times, nothing is there. Just waiting for the Chinese to come and take it over, which is the process there. So Putin kind of parcels it out and sells it for certain benefits to him and his cronies to the Chinese. And the only thought you can read in his eyes, this guy's eyes, is that I gotta get out of there. The whole of Russia, which has negative birth rate at this point, killing basically, it's a suicide. This guy is an exception. He has 3 kids. He's a hardworking guy. But a lot of people, whoever they interviewed in this film, whoever they met, they spend time in Europe. They live in Europe. All Russians, huge colonies of Russians. People try to get out of Russia as long as they can. And it's a long bit. I just want to finish. And this is a model of today's globalist world. So say all you want about globalism, but those tyrants that rule most of the world, 190 countries probably out of 200 in the world, are ruled by tyrants, by people who only know how to squeeze blood and money out of their own people. And all they want, the way they build a country, they want to send people out to the United States. They want to sell people out to Portugal. They want to send people out to Europe. So they would send money back to the country. They don't want to build anything for
Sure.
them. That's the model. They
Right.
exist. That's how they exist. And that's
Yeah,
all
and
the.
it's really
No, no, no. Go ahead. Go ahead.
it's really sad in the sense that there's so much evidence available. And again, I come back to this theme again and again on my book because the reason I wanted to do this is I don't want to. We had many, many instances while we were there traveling around to the various cities where you could see that what we were saying to the Soviet people, the visitors, was getting through because either a kind of a look in the eye or a nod or something, and they because remember okay, as you know, all they had seen or known about the United States was negative. No praise or no positive fact about the United States of America had ever penetrated. When we showed up in Kazan in July of that year, that was still a closed city. We were the first uh, foreigners to ever visit during the Soviet time, Kazan. And so it was like they were talking to people from the moon. I mean, if we would show them things, and then inevitably, and this was the most interesting part, I guess, of the book, and I try to include several examples of this. Inevitably, they wanted to know everything they could find out about life in America, about the American system, about the American people, and quite often they would. They would come very close to asking what the KGB would determine was prohibited questions. Many incidents that I relay in the book. I tried not to belabor it, but just so that you could see, people could see the the enormity of it, how widespread it was. It was a monolithic society. There was no deviation, 1 degree left or right. You towed the party line, or else. And we were fortunate in 1972 was a well, it was like now it was a presidential election year,
Hmm.
and President Nixon was running for re-election against a guy named George McGovern. It was pretty left leaning, and I think the USA in selecting us, the staff for the exhibit, the guides, they did a very smart thing because about I'd say 65, maybe 70% of us supported Nixon, and the others supported McGovern. And we were allowed, which is normally not allowed of federal employees, but we were temporary employees, so they let us do it. We were allowed to wear these campaign buttons, etc. So we put them on, and they wanted us to put them on.
Hmm.
And of course, it facilitated all manner of discussion.
So very
And
subversive for Russians.
oh well, yeah, and the thing that comes by, and I'm back to mine on that, and I do describe this in the book as well. I was leaving the exhibit one afternoon, the evening. It was either in Kazan or Donetsk, I don't remember now, but
Hmm.
it's in one of the chapters. And there were these two young Russian fellows standing near the exit. They were standing outside having a cigarette, and one was just saying to the other, "I can't believe what I just saw in there." And the other one says, "What?" He said, "Well, I went around all these stands. There were several of the exhibits on the things being displayed." And he said, "I asked every one of those guides, so who are you supporting in the presidential election?" One would say, "Well, Nixon." Why? I would always ask him, why? Well, because he's done a pretty good job. He's pretty effective leader. Go to the next stand, and who are you supporting? Nixon. Why? Well, I think McGovern's a little bit too far left for me. And then they go to the third stand, and here's this fellow, and he says, "You got a McGovern button on." And they said, "Oh, are you supporting Senator McGovern?" He said, "Yes." And they said, "Why?" He said, "Because Nixon's a Swolch," which Russian is SOB.
Yeah.
You know, and they walked out of there thinking, uh, I'm not sure they knew what to think because it was there, it was real. This was not some kind of act. These people we were genuine about it, and for them it was just an eye-opening moment in their lives. And the one said to the other, "Can you believe that? These people apparently are getting paid by the American government." And one of them just called the president of the United States a Swolich in pub in front of people, in front of Soviet citizens. Can you believe that? So there were many such things, and I tried to include, well, as many of them as I could without becoming boring. Uh, these little incidents, these little moments, these little snippets in time where you grab a piece of reality. One of the things that we had to deal with in all three cities where we showed the exhibit were what we came to call them plants. These were most of them were well, some of them were directly employed, I suspect, by the KGB, and others were just kind of doing it because they'd been told to do it. But they had an amazing knowledge of American social problems, and they would come up and they'd start to harangue. What is this thing called racism in your country? We don't have that here. What's the deal with Angela Davis? Why do you persecute her just because she's a communist? What is it? Vietnam? What's that about? Or one of them asked, well, what's this unemployment feature? We don't have anything like that because we have full employment. The Soviet Constitution guarantees us a job.
Free vacation.
It's
free vacations, free resorts,
yeah.
Free kindergarten, daycare, everything. Education's free.
All of it. They would ask about the whole thing. And I remember on two separate occasions, there were incidences where we got a little help from some of the Soviet citizens themselves. As to Vietnam, one of these fellows was working over one of our guides pretty hard on it, and he said, "So tell me, Vietnam, what did you go over there to do? What did you were you trying to save the Vietnamese from Vietnamese, were you?" And there was a fellow standing right behind him, about maybe 6 inches taller than the guy. And he leaned over and he said, "Yeah, just like we saved the Czechs from the Czechs in 1968. Of course, when that happens, those moments, the crowd vanishes, but the point has been made." And the other one concerned, there was a couple of them on healthcare, but the funny one also on unemployment was this guy was working on. Finally, the guy had kind of enough of it, and so he said, "So what is this unemployment? We don't have that here." And the guy looked down at him and he said, "Well, of course you don't." I said, "Hey, listen," he said, "if half of our people were watching the other half and reporting on it, we wouldn't have any unemployment either." And there was the snickers and the looks on the faces of the Soviet people, and they started to giggle until the other guy stared them down. So there were many instances like that, just little life instances, but there were a whole lot more that were just, genuinely sad. I think I tell one brief incident here where one fellow walked up to me at the end of the exhibit. It was closing down, and he whispered to me, looked around and whispered to me, he said, "You know, my wife and I would really love to invite you and a couple of your associates over to our place for dinner." Because again, Russians they're very hospitable people. That's just their nature. And he said, and then he had this sad look on his face. He said, "But I can't, because if I do," he didn't even have to finish the sentence. I knew where he was going, because what would happen then is 20 minutes after we would leave, the knock on the door would come, and here they came. So you're consorting with anti-Soviet forces, and you're okay. And the other incident was, I guess, the coup de grace, as far as really seeing with one's own eyes the bottom line difference here between the societies. There was an incident in Leningrad. We were towards the end of our trip. We'd been there almost 6 months on the ground, so we were not rookies. We'd gone through our first, second, and third rodeos, so to speak. Mm-hmm. And there was a large crowd. It wasn't at my stand, but it was one over, so I could look over and see what's happening. All of a sudden, this rather large crowd gathered over there, and usually that meant, there's some action. Something's hot. Something being discussed. So I could just barely hear from there, but I moved a little closer, and I heard there were two Soviet plants. They were really working over one of our guides pretty tough. And there was a young Soviet fellow I'm going to say he was mid to late 20s, maybe. Uh, and he would interrupt them. He was correcting him, and he was saying, "Don't listen to this. This is a bunch of nonsense. Here's the truth." Well, he did that 3 or 4 times, and the crowd got bigger. And next thing, and his poor wife, was standing next to him. She's tugging on his sleeve, saying, "Musha, Musha, stop it. Let's go. No, stop it." Uh, and then I saw, because we were out on the Vasily Island, the Vasily schools in Leningrad, where
Mm-hmm.
they had this huge glass encased exhibit pavilion where our exhibit was shown. So you could see outside what was going on as well as inside. And I noticed that outside the doors something was happening. Uh, and there were 4 or 5 of these guys. Now these guys were pretty obvious. They were the leather jacket guys. You didn't have to guess who these fellows were. And they started working their way through the crowd, and they were headed for this guy. We'll call him Misha. I don't remember his name. And by this time, the wife is pleading and crying. All of a sudden, they looked to the back of the pavilion, and up drove the black van. And on a signal from out there, 4 of these guys grabbed this guy
Mm-hmm.
and hustled him through the crowd outside the door, boom, into the back of the van, and gone he was. Of course, the wife was devastated. He had said, by the way, during his conversation, he had even pulled out his prepiska, his local registration card.
Yeah.
He said, "See here, I'm not afraid of these
Right.
guys. I've done time for my views, and I'll do it again." Well, he sure did, because they whisked him away, and the Soviet crowd at that time they got this look on their face like, yeah, and then this dejected look, and they looked at the floor, and they began to disperse.
Yeah, a lot of people
And I thought,
supported that
much,
too. They thought that's yeah. Go ahead. Go ahead.
no,
Yeah, so people,
mhm. But
yeah, there was
these people
much public
genuinely,
support of this, and a lot of people were snitching and writing. And even here,
Mhm.
one of the tales I was told when I moved to the States, when I came to Brooklyn, I say there are still people who try to find the address of New York KGB office. I mean, American KGB, or write a letter just to out the neighbor for doing whatever. So they were looking for
Mhm.
the local place. Of course, once
Sure.
you live long enough here, you find that there are places where you can write to and cause some trouble to your
Mhm.
neighbor. That's no doubt about it. But I remember those shows that Charles talking about, and you couldn't even really go there if you are, say, under age of 16, unless you have a passport, or you have some really good talking, smooth talking grown-ups with you. So when I was 14 or 15, I was taken by 2 teachers from my school, young students, actually, undergraduates, who came to teach to my school, and we became friends, and we decided to go together to see the show. And we went, we were, it was in Tashkent, in Uzbekistan, where I lived, where I came from. And we were led single file to this big sports arena where the show, big by Uzbeki standards. It's like a big gymnasium, basically, or a big school here, or a university's gymnasium, that size. But the show seems to be huge to us, and there was, not Information USA, House, Habitat USA was the name of it. And we really were crazy about those buttons that they were distributed at the show. We had nothing like it. And once we started going back and forth with Charles, a lot of memories, especially when I was reading the book, came to me. And the glossy paper on those catalogs that were given away was beautiful pictures of American homes and American life. Gloss was of totally different quality. We had our own glosses, Russian glosses, fashion. Everything was kind of through the looking glass, continuing Lewis Carroll's line, was like a looking glass. So you see things that look like American, they feel like, but they're not. And you could immediately see the stitching is different on the clothes. That you see a foreigner, the stitching is different. You don't even see the jeans. Jeans were like crazy stuff. For jeans, wearing jeans in the wrong company could get you arrested. I couldn't go to my college when I was wearing jeans. They would line us up, and they would say, "Okay, who's wearing the pants? who has the blood of Vietnam and Afghanistan on him.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So
Yep.
they sent me back home a
Well,
couple of times. And when we were standing, waiting for the military education in Soviet Union, we had one day in the university dedicated to military stuff, and we were studying to become the artillery officers. So the chief of the department in the university was also a poet, and a big part of Russian World War II imagery is the names of Russian soldiers written on Reichstag after it was taken by Berlin was taken by the Russians, by the Red Army. There were names of Russian
Right.
soldiers who made all the way from Siberia, all the way from Ukraine, just to say that they were there and they won. So the poetry by this colonel, actually, who was running this department, was that you gentlemen from the White, I'm just translating on the fly, you gentlemen from the White House, you have no doubts that one day I will come and leave my name on the walls of the White House. I will sign my name on the wall. He was like in his 60s. Not that old, so he had his hopes. I think he ended up, died from alcoholism because, you cannot be that smart and go unpunished in the Soviet Union writing poetry. Well, Colonel, can't do that.
Well, I hope, even though he's gone, I hope his son doesn't fulfill his old dream.
No,
But back to that one incident, I would just finish it up by saying, to me, this one incident that I just described that happened in Leningrad at the pavilion, this encapsulated to me that, and I never forgot it. And I often wondered later, as I wrote in the book, I wonder what happened to this fellow, because, Brezhnev himself had said, well, we don't need these labor camps and all the gulags. And we know that communism, we all know that communism is the only system that makes any sense for people to live under. And anyone who challenges that or deviates from it obviously is not a well person, is not right in the head. So those people need treatment. And that's when they started, I think, all the stuff with the psychiatric wards. And we came to find out it didn't matter whether it was part of a regular hospital or a separate facility. Those facilities where they did the medical treatment were run not by the Ministry of Health, but the Ministry of State Security. So in a way, Soviet society had become a little more polished on the edges. You didn't have random quotas of people to be arrested and sent to the Gulag by Stalin by the knock at 4 o'clock in the morning, etc. But you still had the overall atmosphere, the feeling that everybody knows their boundaries and their lanes, and don't you dare get out of it. So when I look today and I see all these glorious promises that that are coming out of democratic socialists, I just love that term, democratic socialists. That's like saying I don't know, a liberal conservative. I don't even have a good comparison for it, because Karl Marx himself said, when he was talking about the failure of the old New Harmony thing in Indiana in 1825, he said, well, that obviously failed. You can't have, socialism cannot be voluntary. It must be imposed. We have to do this on the part of the people who are too stupid and too rube-like to do it for themselves. But if you look at, for example, Hugo Chavez's campaign in 2000, 2001, whatever it was, in Venezuela, he was promising a lot of this. And again, the verbiage repeats over the years: social justice, income equality, everyone's equal, and all that. The promises that you hear today are very, very similar to all of those. And so I guess my plea to the American people is, please, stop for a minute and think. do you really want to risk everything we have, our cherished way of life, the freedoms that were nurtured in this country and defended by generations of Americans that came forth? Do you want to put all that at risk for some pie in the sky notion of everyone being quote unquote equal, of all these things which have never worked out as advertised? Do you really want to do it? You just stop and think. And that, I guess that's why I try to get people to this day to read my book, because here again, I don't talk, theoretical stuff. We're talking ground level reality, people's lives, the way they led it, the way they were forced to conform, and all of it that goes with it. And I suppose the only way that these people, I hope Mark Twain was not right when he said long ago that humans will learn at the school of hard knocks and at no other. Gosh, I hope that's not true, because if it is,
but it is, unfortunately.
and the saddest part is that these people, the ones who don't know any better, the ones who are falling for the siren song, the ones who may be well-intentioned, but that they just don't know. The
There's
saddest part is,
no good intentions there. Charles, I thought so myself. I'm sorry, interrupt you. I just thought that you will continue without interruption, without paying attention. But it's very evil thing. Starting from Lenin, starting
sure.
from Marx, all those people are certified evil. Everything you hear. There are very few people who would argue that nothing good. The Soviet Union produced certain things that are world-class achievements. Very few people. I'm almost among those people who would argue that, because all these great things came, first thing, from authoritarianism, from prison-like environment for people without them even realizing they live in a prison. They were like, I don't know, giraffes in a safari park. You cannot go anywhere. You're there. Your children will be there. You cannot leave.
Mm-hmm.
You want a car. How do you make a car? How do you get a car? You cannot buy a car. It's state produced. You have to wait 15 years. You want your house, you want your apartment, which is the size of a closet somewhere in Malibu, in LA, the big socialist movie star's house. That's the closet in her house, or rap music star. That closet would be the size of this apartment. You have to wait from 12 to 15 years. Or to bribe your way into this apartment. Where did you get the money? When you bring for the bribe. You cannot do anything in private. You cannot have your own business. You cannot have your kids study where you want them to study. If you have to have huge connections if you want to get ahead in life. It's not even like in England, where you are born a regular person. You are very limited in social terms. You cannot get too much far from where your family is. It's not even like this. You're supposed to live in the same barrack your family used to live. That's how it works.
Right.
And everybody, it's so much against human nature. People got out of Soviet Union. They produced amazing results, starting from Sikorsky's helicopters, Air Force Two, right? And lots and lots of things, ending with, God bless him, Sergey Brin, Google, etc. So people are not silly by nature. They're not stupid. It's just that the conditions there are absolutely inhuman, and this is socialism. This is what they want here, those people.
Yeah, when I said good intentions, I wasn't talking about the people making the promises, or the ones who would inherit. But no, I'm talking about the young people who don't have, especially the younger ones who don't have the life experience to be able to see these things. And they've been told, many of them, since they were in, I don't know what, 5th grade, that government is good. It solves all the problems. It's going to do all this for you. And on the flip side of it, that these greedy businesses and all these people, they're the ones that are causing all this misery. We can straighten it out. That's who I meant. And those are the people that I would just implore to read this book and others like it. Mine's not the only one, God knows. And but it is sad, and there is always that element of the siren song. Lure them in, and then do what
You
socialism
have them, yeah,
always
yeah. That's what we
does.
see in our educational system very much, fairy tale like, and people believe in things that nobody wants to be told what to do, right? In this country, nobody wants to say, to be told that your salary will be $100 a month, and in 10 years we'll come to talk to us again, right? Or we don't call us, we'll call you, right? So this is how
Hmm.
it was in Soviet Union. This is how socialism exists. This is how, and communism is even worse. And everything is by example. Every punishment is made an example. Whatever crime you have committed, I'm not talking about criminal, terrible crimes, murders, etc. But politically, everything is turned into a crime, and huge articles follow. I hope to have a program soon in Russian, which would be about how maybe we'll do it in English, since the friend of mine, he's a Brit. He's a very well known expert in Shostakovich, Dmitry Shostakovich, who was uh, really dragged through the mud, whose name was world famous composer, and suddenly Stalin turned on him, and what happened to him was absolute disgrace from any point
Yeah.
of view. So
You know,
that's how it was.
the other point that I would make also, it's very interesting culturally. You hear some people say, oh, well, that was all a long time ago. We're much more sophisticated now, and we're much smarter than any of it. That's exactly what they thought in each one of those cases. And also, as far as being different people, it didn't matter. Take Eastern Europe, for example. Uh, that system crumbled in Eastern Europe just the way it did in the Soviet Union. In fact, it was the precursor to the crumbling of the Soviet Union. So the system didn't work for Germans, Czechs, Poles, Romanians, Hungarians, Russians. It doesn't matter. It's an international cancer, and it will not work anywhere with any people at any time. And you can just go through history and say, I often say to people that I still bother arguing with on the other side, and they're becoming a dwindling few. I say, look, show me one example, just one, where, and don't be like Bernie Sanders. Don't start with Norway and Denmark. That's not what we're talking about here. Those are very large social welfare states. Uh,
Capitalist countries,
don't,
basically the Dubai of the North. That's what they are.
right. But we're talking about a system that is being proposed to be built by Bernie Sanders, AOC, Senator Booker, and these guys. Listen, this has nothing to do with Western European quote unquote socialism, because those people, by the way, will tell you they're not socialists. They're not. Some of them dabbled in it for a while, saw what it was, said no, thank you. We are talking about the hard version, and that's what these people. I'm kind of surprised, in a way, that they're coming so overtly, so openly towards it now. And yet, when I think, well, their logic tells them, okay, the education system and the media have done their work now for two full generations. People are ready. People are ready to accept this. And I would say to those people who are thinking of accepting it, well, if you do, you're going to accept a whole lot of stuff that they're never going to tell you about until it's too late. And if you want to read about it, read my book or several others. If you want to see it, if you dare, go down to Venezuela and spend 3 months down there. And if you survive and come back, you'll see it, because it's the same mirror everywhere.
I can tell you what's going to happen. People go to Venezuela. They live in Best Western. They meet somebody who says, for $20, I will drive you around. I will bring you fresh produce. I have a friend who will send you tchotchkes, this and that, and the hat and the shoes made in Peru or whatever, in the mountains. I'm not good at. I never been to South America, so it doesn't excuse my ignorance regarding the mountains in Venezuela, but they should be so. So they would come back. They say it's so nice. People are wonderful. People are so friendly. I'm there. I was an American. They charge me $20 a day for everything. They cannot be more friendlier. That's how they would come back from Russia. So many people would come back from Soviet Union and say it's not true. Wonderful people. They all heard the Beatles. They showed me this and that, and they showed me around. And they introduced me to the friend who was wearing a leather jacket, and he was even a member of a KGB. And he spoke perfect English. Can you imagine this? You know, last 20, 30 years, especially with the advent of internet, what happened? People kind of, like they have a bicycle, the motorcycle, and you have a sidecar, right? And people took out their brains and they put it in a sidecar. Like 50% of the questions you ask somebody, they say, Google it. They say, how much is 37 by 56? And they say, oh, where's the calculator?
Yeah.
So no necessity to kind of strain oneself, and no necessity to address the higher authority on matters of morals. You go, oh, you have seen this movie? That's how they resolved it. You read this book? Or you read this article? This is how they did it. And that kind of robbed us all, and the West in particular, because in the East, I mean, geographically and geopolitically speaking, people more rely to look at kind of us versus men in the caves, men in caves, the Al-Qaeda, etc., right? How much firepower and money we have, and how this asymmetrical warfare goes on for how many years? So we kind of rob ourselves of our humanity, of which our devotion, our understanding, our humbleness compared to the generations that took us to this point where we are. We are not humble anymore. We kind of have this a lot of Russian expressions about that, but it's good.
From time to time, right?
Self-confidence
From time to time
is nice. Yeah.
I shudder to think, if I contemplate this long enough. My wife and I were talking about this just the other day, and she said, can you imagine this? The current younger generation, had they been called on to face down Adolf Hitler and the Wehrmacht, it probably wouldn't have gone very well. There's another point that I wanted to make. I found an article on the American Thinker. It was entitled "A Soviet Cassandra for Our Time," and this author takes us through some of the works of Nadezhda Mandelstam, who, as you know, was the wife of a poet who died in the Gulag. And she wrote two pretty neat books. I'm reading one of them now. And it's really frightening to see, again, the similarities, especially she describes the lead up to the society and the things that started to happen as this freedom disappeared, or that right disappeared, or this censorship was done. And it's almost like you're picking up today's newspaper, and there it is. Yeah. I mean, when you get to the point where one fellow out in Sacramento, California, I think it was, he had worked 22 years for the NBA basketball team there, and after the Minneapolis stuff started to break and the Black Lives Matter and the sports teams all went with it, this fellow had the brazen temerity to get on his Twitter, and they tweeted out that, well, I think all lives matter, and he was fired the next day. So this and the stifling of the things, I do not know how the exemptions that were granted to social media continue to be enforced when we know that they are stifling and censoring any speech and any things that they don't agree with. I don't understand. I'd love to ask Attorney General Barr this question. Antifa, I thought, had been declared by the U.S. government to be a domestic terrorist organization. Well, if that's the case, what are they doing loose out on these streets? That's sort of like, we wouldn't let Al-Qaeda parade around in masks and throw grenades. Why is this acceptable? So, again, all these signs are just starting to look pretty familiar to many of us and pretty bad. And so I just really hope and pray that enough Americans will now, as this election starts to heat up and get closer and closer, uh, put put down the spin machines and all that stuff. Take a look at what's really happening, and again, ask yourself the key question: do you really want to risk what we know has happened over and over and over again for
Yeah.
some pie in the sky promises which nobody
Yeah,
has ever
the answer,
fulfilled?
meantime, is in front of us. You look at New York, you look at our mayor, you look at our people. I'm after this interview, I'm going to go visit the city, probably publish some photos that I will take in in Midtown. I have some creative project with my wife, so we need some materials to buy from there. So we'll venture outside of our comfortable South Brooklyn Russian enclave, so we'll see how things are there. I just, you see, the ineptitude is of socialists. Of course, capitalists are also, not without a fault, and those who work, they make mistakes. But the socialist stupid is really stupid. It's a special kind of stupid, as they say, because say here in New York, as we all know, as everybody knows, our mayor went and they painted Black Lives Matter beneath the on the pavement by the Trump Tower, right? Big
Mm-hmm.
yellow letters, usually invisible. After they would be done, everything dried up. Three people tried to vandalize the mural. The huge mural it's like Sistine Chapel right over here. It's just incredible artistic value. So it was all restored, kept pristine, etc., etc. Black Lives Matter. So some guy, artist, calls himself artist. I call him artist in Staten Island, which is like the most Republican area of New York City, the borough of Staten Island. What he did, those two yellow lines in the middle of in the center of the road that do not pass, right?
Mm-hmm.
So he came with a bucket of blue paint, and he started painting blue line between those two, and that was his representation of Blue Lives Matter. Police lives matter. Blue line symbolizes the line between kind of bad and good, good and bad. So this is what he started to do. And protests ensued. A lot of people came over. They say he is vandalizing the road. He's causing hazardous conditions. He's like ruining the work of the Department of Transportation crews, all this stuff. And he needs a permit. So he got an attorney. And they called the mayor's office and they asked, did Mayor de Blasio got a permit to paint Black Lives Matter on Fifth Avenue? And said, no. Mayor didn't bother to get this permit, which they say is kind of written into law in New York City.
Mm-hmm.
That's how, do as I say, not as I do, to the extreme. And the Russian thing,
Yeah.
the other day I was interviewing the guy who spent 12 years in San Francisco and all over the United States. He was the TV guy from 1988 to 2000. He was a Soviet correspondent, a Russian correspondent, so TV presenter, Mikhail Taratuta. Very nice guy, very big Trump supporter, from what I can understand. And he worked in the radio before television. And he said that, of course, we had Voice here in the United States. There is still a Voice of America, not the same organization as it used to be 40 years ago,
Right.
but it's now totally anti-American propaganda in Russian. But then it used to be an American way of life through the Russian language. The source, my grandfather used to listen to it a lot. So he came there to work with in this organization, which was not the Voice of America. Sorry, he was working in the counterpart, the Russian organization that were broadcasting in English about the virtues of communism and Soviet Union and how everything is peachy keen. So he went there and he saw all the programming. He was head of the department there, and he asked at one point, "What is the Where do you broadcast? What's the frequency? Where do Americans see us? Of course, they said that we hear them in shortwaves here, the American radio. The Voice of America, we can find in shortwaves broadcast range. And we do the same thing to Americans. We broadcast it there in short range, short waves. And he said there's no receiver, no radio in America that has SW, shortwave. Everything is FM and AM. Nobody's listening to what you're saying here. The whole department was producing for many, many years what no Americans whatsoever had a chance to hear. You cannot reach AM or FM to the United States, but they didn't care.
Yeah.
They just did this SW
Yeah.
thing, and at the time it was like $150 to $200 to buy this sort of equipment to listen to that. And I'm sure somewhere in the Communist Party, caves they would have it here in the States.
Well,
But,
I remember in Moscow when we first showed up in the Soviet Union. I remember in Moscow, or it might have been in Kazan, I don't know the first city. Anyway, we checked in the hotel, and I looked up on the shelf, and there was a radio there, and I discovered quite away that there were only two channels in those days, on and off. But the what you mentioned about the Black Lives Matter and the disparity between the treatment of it. I don't know if I included this joke in the many others that I have in the book, but it was one of my favorites, and it illustrates so well our media today. It was called The Joke of the Two Sprinters, and it went like this. TASS, which was, as you know, the Soviet information agency, their version of UPI or whatever, they set up the joke that there was a two-man sprint, 100-meter dash between a Soviet sprinter and an American sprinter. And it was done at a local facility somewhere. So TASS is going to report the results of that race. And their report will depend on on the outcome of the race. If the Soviet sprinter won the race, TASS would broadcast at a huge international meet. Sounds like there's hundreds of participants. In the 100-meter dash, the Soviet sprinter finished first and the American finished last. And if the other result happened, then they would report at a huge international track meet in the 100-meter dash, the Soviet sprinter finished second and the American was next to last. So everything that you see the media doing, if you watch them and how they report or don't report, it's the Pravda Izvestia TASS model right there in front of you. That's many of them now admit it. They so hate Donald Trump for depriving them of their queen in 2016 that their only goal is to get him defeated. And they will so state, they will say, objectivity. Well, that's not what we're about anymore. We have a societal purpose that we have to accomplish here. Well, when you reach that state of the art, so to speak, and you see all the censorship and the stifling of debate, diversity becomes the key word on university campuses, and yet the most important university diversity in the world, diversity of thought, is not allowed. So you see sign after sign after sign of what's coming, and caution, we better be careful. The yellow light is blinking right now.
yeah, I see. My way of treating this situation is to learn how they operate on the other side and turn it against them immediately on the same level of aggression, not exactly going there and smashing windows of the luxury stores that etc., etc. No, but in discussion, in conversation, we are at a stage where we can still affect the outcome by elections and by social activity, and by the worst thing for me is not to buy from the businesses you disagree with political. If they want to go political, I'll go political in my purchasing habits. That's it. No Nike.
Right.
No Nike. You open your
Right.
mouth, no Coke. What else? Who's next? That's Pepsi. More so that they turned to their old logo in some of the products. That was
Yeah.
very heartwarming because Pepsi logo from the prisoner Soviet regime has very special meaning. Charles, thank you so very much for again giving your time and your wonderful book. I'm sure will find its reader today, and I encourage parents to read this book and give it to the children because this is a view of a young man, the memories of a young man, a man who today was so prone to go and protest and get his head cracked open, by the way, either by those next to him or the police. So by knowing those things, you will save him or her. Because my heart is not in place where it used to be some time ago. When I think about the kids who just led into those activities in the streets, and it's life changing to them. It's just a lot of pain. Try to keep them away from that. Give them information, talk to them, spend time with them. This is the
I
tool
thank
you
you
can
very
use.
Thank you for your time today. I always enjoy talking to you.
Charles, thanks. We'll talk again.